This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft, because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. This week we bring you part 2 of our conversation, what we're reading and why we chose it. We pick up where we left off, discussing All the Light We Cannot See.
It has, if you want a story that has intrigue, it's definitely a good one for that.
Okay, good. I mean, so far 150 pages in, I wouldn't say there's a lot of intrigue. You know, the Nazis are invading France and we know how that turned out. And I love the two main characters, Marie-Laure and Werner, and I'm definitely interested in them and their experiences. You know, but at this point, it's still very character driven. I'm watching them in the early days of the war. You know, it opens before the French occupation, and 150 pages in, Marie and her father have left Paris, you know, so the occupation is happening. It's just kind of coming into France. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying the characters. I'm enjoying the writing. I wish it wasn't so chopped up. I feel like I would be pulled in to these scenes that are so beautifully written, and I would travel with them instead of being like, nope, you're jerked out of it. Now we aren't with her. Now we're with him. Oh, well, this is really, oh, nope. Jerked out of that. Oh, well, okay, this is a great scene too. Oh, no, jerked out of that. I'm like, could I?
And it's because in my view, it is a character story. So and the intrigue comes from that. So it's interesting you point that out, that a production device in the way that the story is executed is taking away from some of its more powerful elements.
And it's making you make a choice every time you put it down.
Yeah.
Do I want to pick this back up again? Do I want to pick this back up again? Do I want to pick this back up again? And like that, when you have to have tenacity to read a book because you're like, I know this book is going to be good. That's hard. You know, it's much easier to just move on.
Exactly.
Well, you were saying that you off air that you did experience it and didn't finish it from an audiobook point of view. So did you experience the same kind of thing where you were kind of in and out of?
I don't remember.
No.
I don't remember feeling that, but I think, you know, when it's being read aloud to you, you probably don't know exactly where the chapter breaks are. I know you said it was switching point of views too, but I think also because it's a slower pace, because you're having it read aloud, you know, 10, 15 minutes is different than, you know, 4 pages or 5 pages or something. No, I don't remember that. I just remember I had a stint where I didn't have time to listen to it and it just fell out, you know, right? And then I'm like, And that's the thing I was saying, like, you have to have tenacity to finish it. It's kind of disappointing. I mean, I want to finish it. I enjoyed what I was listening to. It's just that I had fallen enough away from it. And there wasn't that like magnetic draw of, I need to get back to that. I need to get back to that. I need to get back to it. It was just like my, you know, checked out from the library came up and I didn't bother putting a hold on it again. I just let it go.
So I wonder if those more rapidly switching points of view result in the fact that you don't attach as strongly. And so therefore, if it's a long audio book, it's less compelling to want to come back to it because you're never really fully in the middle of any one character.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely my experience reading it with these switching viewpoints. When I'm loving a book, I'll get breakfast, and I don't normally read while I'm eating because I don't want to get food on the book. And if you're eating a sandwich or something, you gotta wipe your fingers, turn the page, take a bite, wipe your fingers. It's a nuisance. So I don't usually read and eat, but if I'm really into a book, it's like, you can't keep me away from the book. I'm gonna prop it up and I'm going to use the salt shaker to hold it open while I'm eating and reading. And like, I'm not having that experience with this book. And I was on a camping trip and I took it and I read, maybe 2 or 3 chapters one evening, and that was it. It was not like oh, night, y'all, I'm going to be in my tent with my book. It was
right.
Yeah, it's not holding me the way I think it could. And my experience of it so far is that that's because it's choppy, because just as I'm really moving into something with a character, I'm with the other character.
Right. There was a time, I don't remember, a number of years ago when this was a fairly new book, where a lot of the podcasts I was listening to were just praising it to the heavens. Oh, you must read this book. You must read this book. And I kind of shied away from starting it at that point because I wanted to get away from the expectation. So I wonder too if like even that was subconsciously in the back of my mind of like all these people had said, oh, this is such a good book. You need to read it. So then I'm like thinking I have to enjoy this book, don't I? Right? Like so many people have loved it. It must be awesome. And not that it's not, but I think, I think to some extent you got to be careful when you're picking your books as to how much noise you have coming in with it. Like if one person or a good friend or someone you read similarly to recommend something, then you can just kind of say, awesome, I'll enjoy this. That's fine. But if you have a bunch of quote experts or quote book critics or quote literary people handing you something because it's supposed to be awesome. The same thing happened to me with In the Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I just didn't enjoy the book. And I think it was because there was just so much noise of, oh, this is so cool. The book is so good. And then I read it and I couldn't figure out why. And like maybe if I had just read it for the enjoyment of it rather than trying to figure out why everybody thought it was so good, it would have been a different experience. So,
yeah, whereas a good friend of mine said, "Oh, you haven't read that?" Because I'd read a lot of that type of fancy. Oh, you should read that. Oh, okay. And I forgot about it for a while, and then I was looking for something to read. Oh, yeah, I should read The Name of the Wind, and I loved it. I had no idea there was a big fuss about it, and it wasn't until I read the next book in this series. Oh, great! Let's finish it. Let's get the third book then. Yeah. Oh. Okay, right. There's a big furor about this whole thing, and
it doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. So, and he realized that it was a big deal when this book came out, and people is still eagerly awaiting the trilogy. And I think he's teaming up with Mr. Martin and see how long they can both go without finishing something.
Well, I couldn't imagine being that author. You send out your debut book, and the world goes crazy. Because it's so experimental and awesome. And then now you have to finish your trilogy. Like, what if you don't pull it off? I'd have stage fright. Like, maybe you guys just don't get the third book.
Have you seen Wonder Boys or read Wonder Boys? Michael Chabon's Wonder Boys?
No.
Oh, go watch the movie. It's just so funny. It's one of my favorite
I'll put it on
meta writing movies. Yes, but there's Michael Douglas plays a former Wonder Boy whose debut novel got all the acclaim, and then he went and started teaching writing at a college, and his second novel is still being waited for.
When I worked many years ago, I worked in the music industry. Now it was always almost the death of a band if their first album was too successful. It was really hard to do this. It was always the difficult second album. That was the name of it. We're working on the difficult second album, and I think that applies to authors as well. If you've had a first book in a trilogy really received well, or in any series, then there's not. I mean, we all want to write better with each successive book, I think, and there's not just that pressure. There's then the pressure of, is this going to hit that same sweet spot? And I think it's interesting what Catherine was saying is that you've got to take yourself completely out of hype, both as a reader and as an author, because otherwise the expectations just ring too heavily, they're way too heavly. I think Kobo keeps stats on the actual, or they share, Amazon would know as well, but they don't share anything, on how many books are completed. And it's shocking how many aren't. But I believe that it's what was that big literary novel? Was it The Goldfinch? Was that the one?
Oh yeah.
And apparently that's their most unfinished book.
Really?
Yeah. I've not read it.
I would have not finished
so
that.
Heavily pushed.
It's in my closet. I haven't read it yet.
It was so heavily pushed.
Yeah, it was.
Don't. I mean, what?
Right.
I totally read it. I read it in the same kind of vein. And like, I was like, oh, I'll read it. That's fine. Like, great. And I read it and I got done with it. And I just was like, why did I waste my time? And I think, again, it was the hype. I don't think I ever would have picked that book up on my own reading the description because it wasn't in my wheelhouse. Like, it's just not my kind of book. And then beyond that, everybody's praising it to the heavens. I'm thinking, oh, well, even if I don't like it, I read enough, like kind of that literary style that I probably will understand it and get kind of the character arc thing. And no, I just didn't, it never connected with me. And I think that's the danger. I mean, we always want book recommendations, right? We're always asking for them from people. Right. Oh, tell me something to read. Tell me something you enjoyed. And that's great. But I think you also need to have your filter of, but who am I as a reader versus, you know, just grabbing anything, the next thing. Like, I probably will not go read the Robert B. Parker Spencer series, Robert. No matter how much you say so.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not going to be in your...
It's not going to be my thing. Yeah.
Yep. Summer is in full swing here at StoryWorks. In fact, if you can hear birds chirping in the background, it's because I've moved my office to the deck. And the StoryWorks reading series is coming back in September with new episodes. This is a reading period right now, and we are still open for submissions, so please get your stories and essays in. storyworkspodcast.com/submit so that we have time to give you full consideration and hopefully schedule your reading and interview on the StoryWorks Reading Series podcast, a podcast for readers, writers, and readers curious about writers. We give voice to your story and you.
Yeah. But somebody else could be listening to this and go, oh, yeah, I've been looking for something that kind of explores that mystery angle with a single private detective. I'm going to go pick that up, right? But for me, I'm like, you know, I'm never going to write it. I don't really care to read it. So I'm probably never going to go back and mine the depths of private eyes, like just not.
Yeah. And I think also that going back to these sort of email promotion services, and then I'll come back to the Robert B. Parker stuff. That's one of the things I like about them is because when you subscribe to them, you indicate the genres that you're interested in. And so it does include, I mean, mine's a pretty wide range anyway, but it's interesting. You will see things pop in there that are being promoted. And okay, I should take a look at that. Or maybe it's a book that did come out 5 years ago and you never got around to reading, or there was too much hype and you said, one day I'll read that. But I think it helps me narrow down my choices and to stay away from the noise of what the big, 3 or 4 publishing houses are dominating the airwaves with. For nonfiction, I get a fair bit of recommendation from the podcast I listen to because that's a great way of stumbling across those. But the Robert P. Parker things, I am interested maybe one day in writing thrillers, or at least having thriller aspects to maybe the science fiction I'm writing. There probably already is to some degree. And I thought, I've read all the sci-fi stuff, so I understand, the genre conventions and the sort of reader expectations in there. And I know as a reader what I'm vaguely expecting from good mystery detective books, but I haven't read any for ages. I should go and explore some. What's some I haven't come across? What would be good? And then I remembered somebody talking about one of our interviewees, I think, actually mentioned Robert B. Parker as a classic example of a highly respected sleuth series. I'll try that and see, how does he execute this? How does the character come across? And I was hooked from book one. So 40 books later, it got me. And I totally understand that it's not, I didn't go there looking for, I want to read a big series about a detective. I went there specifically for authorial reasons. I wanted to understand how that was delivered, and if it was going to be with good dialogue, then that was going to interest me even more. And it was fantastic dialogue. So, okay, right. This I can learn a lot from this. I'll keep reading.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's important to read for pleasure and for craft, both. Like right now, I'm reading all the light we cannot see for pleasure. And, I certainly notice craft things because I can't help it, but that's not my focus. I am just sitting down with the book. But then I recently read The Thursday Murder Club with a client who wanted us to read it and dissect
that Richard Osman
together. Yeah.
Yeah, I love Richard Osman. I almost got that book the other day, and then I saw the top reviews, and I thought, no, it's probably not my thing right now.
Yeah.
He's a very funny man.
Can't say I would recommend that book. I mean, it's got a lot of charm and humor, but we aren't going to talk about the craft. We're going to
all right,
dissect it. But
that's funny though.
We listened to him being interviewed by another writer who I don't recall right now. And I thought, well, if I had heard this interview first, I would have been so eager to get my hands on the book, because you listen to, well, the interviewer was raving about the book, but then Osman was, talking about his intentions behind the characters and what he loves about the different characters he developed. And, it just made the story sound so fun and engaging, and the characters so real. Yeah, not for me, So sorry.
It's tough when you read for
reading wide. Yeah, sorry.
No, you go.
Do you want me to go or you to go? I'm fine.
You go.
Okay. I was going to say, we talked about reading widely, and I totally get that, Alita, because I'll pick up a book that I'm like, I don't know if this is my thing or not, but I'm going to read it for the craft. I'm going to read it to see how they crafted the story. And then sometimes I hit something that I'm like, yeah, let's go pick up everything else. Or, oh, this is new, a new genre that I really want to explore now. But sometimes I've hit more than my fair of share of duds that I probably would never just pick up for pleasure again. And that's not to say it's a bad book. Right. It's just not my kind of book.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's, there are definitely merits to that book that I could call out, but there are also definitely flaws in the storycraft that are too much for me to make it an enjoyable read.
Right.
So
this is where your knowledge works against you a little bit.
Yeah. And it was interesting to talk to the client because he had read it before we read it together and he really liked it. So he was recommending it. But then as we're reading it and talking about all these different things, then he's seeing, oh, yeah, these issues with the point of view and these issues with redundancy, and why is this chapter in here, and the actual mystery part of it, it's just not there, which I won't bore you with the dissection of it, but it's very short chapters. They're humorous, they're very charming characters, and if somebody is like bus stop reading where you just want to read 3 or 4 pages and feel like you completed a chapter, and you don't want to track clues and red herrings, and I mean, it does fit a certain bill.
I mean, they do say, don't they, that once you start studying crafts, it can contaminate your reading, and there's definitely some of that as well. But then again, I think also for me, it makes me more ruthless in stopping reading and finding craft, well-written things that I can learn from. And I think that's perfectly okay, because it is art. And as Catherine says, not everything suits everybody anyway. So, we've all had books between us here that we've each either respectively, loved or hated, even just between the three of us. And, I would say we're all admirers of well-written books. And I think it's really hard when you're reading for pleasure and trying to understand the craft behind it, because if you're truly reading for pleasure and it's extremely well written, there's no way you're going to see the craft behind it in your first read. Maybe occasionally you go, oh, I love that dialogue. But you might have said that before you're an author anyway. So, that was good. I think you almost have to go back and say, well, this is, to me, becomes a masterwork or something that gives me guidance. And so I'll go back to it and dissect it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just, in the spring, I was teaching my Write Great Openings course, and we looked at Richard Yates's Revolutionary Road at Act 1 of that book. And I think it's chapter 1. I think it's not a prologue, but his opening chapter is it's the same narrator. It's the same authorial narrator, but it's distant. You don't actually drop into the point of view character's perspective until the opening of the second chapter. When I read it for pleasure, I was like, well, isn't that interesting? I wonder why he's doing that. And then I went, you drop into that character's head and you read the rest of the book. And then teaching it, I read it with the hindsight of having read the entire novel. And I was like, oh, that's what he's doing. Oh, that's brilliant. Look at how this is just like setting up everything to come. And one of my students had read the book years ago as well, and she had a similar reaction. She was like, oh, look at what he's doing.
So there you go. The best craft is invisible in a way, isn't it? You just devour the story, and it's only when you come back and you say, oh, that's why that worked. I think that's one of the lovely things about the writing craft, is that it's an art that you can easily dissect, whereas it's hard to say, go and look at a sculpture or a painting and see the evolution of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let me just scrape the top of this Renoir off and see how he did that.
Let's duplicate those brush strokes.
That's right. I'm just going to chop the other arm of David off and just see how that was put together. Yeah.
Do you have a craft question you would like discussed at the StoryWorks Roundtable? Then we have an offer for you. Head over to iTunes specifically, and help us with our search rankings and discoverability by leaving a review. Within that review, pose your question. We will be going through these reviews, pulling out those questions, and in an upcoming episode, we're going to answer them all. We will have a Ask Us Anything StoryWorks Roundtable episode in the not too distant future. So head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and pose your question. We can't wait to discuss your most pressing craft concerns.
Thank you for listening to the StoryWorks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.